Chapter 1. The Dream, the Faucet, and the Floating Mug. Dave Simmons was 4 to 5, which is that precise moment in a man's life when he stops being described as distinguished and starts being described as that guy who really ought to consider doing something about his eyebrows. It's also the age when you realize that your body has begun a slow but determined campaign of betrayal, starting with your back and working its way through various joints you didn't even know you had. His life was routine in the way that a microwave dinner is routine, predictable, vaguely disappointing, and leaving you with a nagging sense that there must be something better out there, though you can't quite remember what it is. He had an office job that smelled perpetually of printer toner and the quiet desperation of people who'd once had dreams. 2 kids who regarded him primarily as a combination ATM/Spotify playlist critic, with emphasis on the word bad. A wife who still loved him, but only in the way one loves a garden hose. Genuinely useful, mildly irritating when it gets tangled, and constantly leaking at the most inconvenient moments. And then there was the faucet upstairs. The goddamn faucet. Drip, drip, drip. 7 months of Chinese water torture, suburban edition. His wife reminded him about it nightly, with the regularity of atomic decay and roughly the same half-life of patience. Dave always said, this weekend. Every weekend. He somehow forgot, though forgot might be too generous a word for what was actually a passive-aggressive Cold War between man and plumbing fixture, and the fixture was winning. That night, he dreamed. He was a god, not the flowing robes and thunderbolts variety, more like a cosmic handyman with superpowers and a tool belt that defied physics. He parted traffic like Moses on prescription sedatives. He folded fitted sheets without even touching them, which is how you know it's a dream. He raised glorious monuments to himself, then knocked them down again because they were blocking the satellite dish and he was missing the game. For once in his beige, suburban existence, he wasn't background noise. He wasn't the supporting character in someone else's sitcom. He was the guy. Then he woke up. His head felt like expired cheese, the kind that's developed sentience and opinions. His back made a sound like bubble wrap being systematically executed. He stumbled to the kitchen, bathrobe flapping open, belly hanging over his pajama bottoms like it had given up on the whole staying in concept and was attempting a slow escape. He poured coffee, glared at the mug with the special resentment reserved for inanimate objects on Monday mornings. Mr. Pickles, the cat, stared from the counter with that particular look cats have perfected over millennia. The look of a predator sizing up prey while simultaneously calculating how much the meat might improve if left to marinate in existential dread for another few years. And then the mug floated. It just lifted, casually, nonchalantly, as if levitation were the most natural thing in the world, and gravity was merely a suggestion it had chosen to ignore. Steam trailed upward like a stripper's last cigarette before the philosophical breakdown. Dave blinked, slapped his face. The mug remained determinedly airborne. Okay, he muttered to the empty kitchen, in the tone of a man whose grasp on reality was making a break for it. Either this is the onset of spectacular schizophrenia, or Folgers has finally gone full Breaking Bad. He reached for the mug. The mug dodged, like it knew exactly what was coming and had developed both consciousness and a survival instinct. Fine. Down. The mug dropped, smashed across the tile in an explosion of ceramic and existential crisis. Coffee geysered upward, soaking his slipper and, he was fairly certain, his soul. Son of a, he caught himself. Swearing at breakfast was a slippery slope. Mr. Pickles hissed, tail puffed to 3 times its normal size, conveying a clear message. You're fucked, dude. Also, I want tuna. Dave decided to test again. Science required data, and his kitchen required destruction, apparently. He picked a new target, the TV remote, which had been missing for 3 weeks and had mysteriously reappeared in the sugar bowl. He focused. The remote levitated, proving that yes, this was really happening, and no, his coffee hadn't been spiked with anything interesting. For one glorious second, he was Neo from the Matrix. Then the remote shot sideways at velocity, smacking into the ceiling fan with a sound like a minor bird strike. The fan gave a mechanical scream that suggested it had just experienced betrayal on a fundamental level. It snapped loose from its moorings and dangled overhead, blades spinning like a drunk helicopter attempting an emergency landing in his kitchen. "Dad!" His son's voice drifted down from upstairs, heavy with the teenage certainty that whatever was happening, it was somehow both catastrophic and his father's fault. "Just fixing the faucet," Dave yelled back. The automatic excuse. The all-purpose deflection. His entire adult life could be summarized as fixing the faucet, which was ironic given that he'd spent 7 months not fixing an actual faucet. He sat at the table, one foot squishing obscenely in his coffee-soaked slipper, staring at his hands like they'd just committed treason. Which, in a way, they had. Dream about being a god. Wake up. Break appliances. Terrorize cat. This is fine. Totally fine. Nothing to see here. Just another Monday. On the counter, a spoon began to vibrate. Subtly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm, like it desperately wanted in on whatever cosmic joke was unfolding. Dave grinned. Slowly, crookedly. It was the grin of a man who knew, intellectually, that he should be terrified, but instead felt like he was 12 years old again, holding a firecracker and a lighter and possessed of the absolute certainty that this time nothing would go wrong. Invisible dad. Human garden hose. Background extra in the sitcom of life. Not anymore. Now he was dangerous. Dangerous in the way only a bored, middle-aged suburban dad could be. Armed with inexplicable powers and absolutely no plan, training, or common sense. Which is to say, dangerous in precisely the way a drunk clown with a nail gun is dangerous. The universe, had it been paying attention, would have been advised to take cover. Chapter 2, Dad versus the Remote and the HOA. The thing about telekinesis, Dave discovered, is that it feels precisely like cheating, but the specific variety of cheating where you're not entirely sure what game you're playing, what the rules are, or whether winning involves actually doing anything useful. It was like having God mode activated in the world's worst video game, Suburb Simulator 3000, now with extra ennui and a mortgage mechanic that never stops draining your health bar. He sat in the recliner, boxes riding dangerously low in that way that middle-aged underwear elastic eventually stops caring about, his gut rising and falling like a tide that had given up on schedules and commitments. The coffee table stretched before him, his battlefield, his Thermopylae, his slightly sticky Waterloo. The target, the remote. "Okay, asshole," he whispered, glaring at it with the intensity of a man who'd spent approximately 400 hours of his life searching for this exact object. "You think you're better than me? You think you get to hide under couch cushions every goddamn night like some kind of plastic ninja?" The remote wiggled, teetered on the edge of the table like a lemming having second thoughts. Then it rose into the air with all the grace of a drunk moth attempting advanced ballet. Dave clenched his fist, more dramatic gesture than actual necessity. But it felt right, and the TV powered on. Channel 4. An infomercial. Some guy with teeth so white they probably violated several laws of physics, selling knives allegedly sharp enough to cut through a cinder block. Though why anyone would want to do this remained a mystery lost to late-night capitalism. Dave grinned. Next channel. The remote clicked. Channel 5. A Spanish soap opera where a woman slapped a man so hard Dave swore he felt it through the screen. A sound that rattled his fillings and made him briefly question the structural integrity of the actor's face. Next channel. Click. Channel 6. Local news. The anchor smiled with that particular expression that suggested his face had been professionally stapled that way by a team of optimism consultants. He was cheerfully announcing a story about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Dave leaned forward, suddenly paranoid in the way only a man with newly acquired superpowers and a guilty conscience can be. Mr. Pickles jumped into his lap with a warning of an assassin. Dave yelped. The remote flew across the room like a missile that had been fired by panic itself, hit the wall with a satisfying thwack, and clattered to the floor in a way that suggested it might finally be dead this time. "Jesus Christ," Dave hissed, clutching his chest. "Don't sneak up on me, you furry demon." The cat purred, smug as hell. This is the thing about cats. They don't care if you have telekinesis. They don't care if you can move mountains or part seas. If you can't manifest salmon out of thin air, you're still basically garbage in a bathrobe, and they'll treat you accordingly. The pantry incident. Later that night, Dave stood in the kitchen, engaged in a staring contest with the pantry door. The Oreos were inside. The double-stuffed Oreos, specifically. His wife had specifically told him not to eat them. They were for the kids' lunches, she'd said, though Dave suspected this was simply an elaborate ruse to deny him cookies, which was frankly tyrannical. But Dave had powers now. He focused, channeling the kind of concentration he'd once reserved for parallel parking and nothing else. The pantry door creaked open slowly, dramatically, like the opening shot of a horror movie where the call is coming from inside the house. A package of Oreos floated off the shelf and drifted toward him through the air, majestic, glorious, like the Ark of the Covenant if the Ark had contained double-stuffed cookies instead of the wrath of God. Which, frankly, would have improved that movie considerably. Then the back door opened mid-air. Cookies spilled out, raining down like chocolatey hailstones in what could only be described as the world's most tragic weather event. Black and white discs tumbled through the air in slow motion, each one a small monument to hubris. Shit, Dave scrambled, catching two with his hands, stepping on three with his bare feet, which hurt considerably more than one might expect, and watching helplessly as Mr. Pickles immediately claimed one like it was his divine right as a feline overlord. That's when his wife walked in. The universe, Dave reflected, had terrible timing. "What are you doing?" she asked, in that tone that wives develop after years of marriage. The one that's less a question and more an existential accusation. Dave froze, Oreo crumbs adhering to his chest hair like some kind of tragic cookie snow. Faucet check. She frowned, which was never a good sign. In the pantry. "Pipes," Dave said, with the confidence of a man who had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. "Everywhere. You'd be surprised. The whole house is basically one big pipe system. Very complex. Requires constant monitoring." She gave him the look. The patented wife look. The look that archaeologists would one day discover had been perfected sometime during the Neolithic period and had been devastating husbands ever since. The look that said, "I know you're lying, but I'm too tired to divorce you right now. And also the paperwork would be annoying." Then she grabbed a paper towel, stepped over the cookie carnage, and walked away. Dave exhaled. Mr. Pickles crunched his stolen Oreo with what could only be described as vindictive satisfaction. The driveway. The next morning, riding high on a dangerous combination of sleep deprivation and unchecked hubris, Dave decided to test his powers on something big. Something bold. Something that would prove he was more than just a man who could make household objects mildly nervous. The minivan. His wife's pride and joy. A beige Chrysler Town & Country with enough Cheerios ground into the seats to feed a moderately sized third-world country, and enough mysterious stains to launch several forensic investigations. Dave stood in the driveway, bathrobe flapping in the wind like a superhero cape designed by someone who'd given up on life, neighbors already out performing their morning rituals with leaf blowers and small dogs. He spread his arms wide like a wizard about to cast Suburbanus Leviosa. The van trembled. Wheels squeaked in protest. Then, slowly, majestically, impossibly, it rolled backward out of the driveway with nobody in it, which is generally not how vans are supposed to work. "Holy shit," Dave whispered, sweat instantly beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. Across the street, his neighbor Carl stopped mid-dog walk. Carl was the kind of guy who treated HOA bylaws like they were holy scripture handed down from a god who cared deeply about lawn height and acceptable fence colors. His dog, a yappy little furball of neuroses named Cinnamon, yipped like it had just witnessed a war crime. Carl narrowed his eyes with the suspicion of a man who'd been waiting his entire life to catch someone violating Section B of something. "Dave, why's your van moving?" Dave panicked with the smooth efficiency of a man who'd spent zero time preparing for this exact scenario. New feature. Hands-free parallel parking. Latest upgrade. From, Tesla. Carl's frown deepened, carving canyons of disapproval into his face. "That's a Chrysler." "Yeah, well, Tesla bought Chrysler last week. Big news. You must have missed it. They announced it right after they solved world hunger." Very busy day for Elon. Carl glared, clutching Cinnamon like she was a shotgun, and he was about to defend his property. If your van dents the curb, that's a violation. Page 47, Section B, subsection 12. Dave forced a smile, beads of sweat now rolling down his temple in a way that suggested his body had given up on subtlety. Noted. Absolutely noted. We'll review the bylaws immediately. Maybe laminate them. Make them a placemat. The van bumped back into the driveway with a metallic clunk that suggested it was as confused about this whole situation as everyone else. Dave lowered his arms, heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Carl shook his head, muttered something that sounded like lunatics mixed with property values, and shuffled off with Cinnamon, who looked back at Dave with what he swore was judgment and had tiny dog eyes. Mr. Pickles watched from the porch, tail twitching with feline disdain. Even the cat looked unimpressed. Dave stood there in his driveway, trembling, adrenaline buzzing through his system like he consumed too much Red Bull and not enough common sense. He'd just move a minivan with his brain. With his brain. A brain that, until yesterday, had been primarily occupied with forgetting appointments and wondering if anyone would notice if he wore the same shirt 2 days in a row. The cat yawned, displaying all of his teeth and none of his respect. Dave grinned anyway. Yeah, he whispered to the universe, to the HOA, to Carl and his judgy dog. Dangerous. And the cat, if cats could talk, which they almost certainly can but simply choose not to because they find human conversation beneath them, would have said, "You're not dangerous. You're a middle-aged dipshit in a bathrobe who just scared a beige van. Call me when you can float a tuna can, Jedi. Until then, you're still the guy who forgot to fix the faucet." Chapter 3. The Haunted Copier Incident. Dave hated his office. This was not a casual dislike, not a mild preference for being elsewhere. This was a profound, existential loathing, the kind of hatred usually reserved for traffic jams, dental surgery, and people who say "let's circle back" in meetings. It was the sort of beige-walled corporate nightmare that made you seriously question whether hell wasn't actually eternal damnation and pitchforks, but rather an infinite series of quarterly reports presented in PowerPoint by someone who'd just discovered word art. The break room coffee tasted like melted crayons mixed with regret, and possibly a hint of existential despair. His cubicle was precisely large enough to accommodate one middle-aged man, one swivel chair with a wheel that squeaked "Judgment Ally," and the crushing weight of 4 to 5 years of life choices that had somehow led to this exact moment. He sat there Monday morning, because of course it was Monday. The universe had a sense of timing but no sense of mercy, hung over on Oreos and regret, clicking through emails about synergizing deliverables and leveraging core competences, phrases that meant absolutely nothing but somehow required immediate action. His boss, Mr. Klemper, waddled past with his daily aura of body odor and disappointment, clutching a mug that proclaimed him #1 leader in Comic Sans, which was really adding insult to injury. That's when Dave had an idea. It was not, by any objective measure, a good idea. But it was an idea. And when you're sitting in a beige cubicle on a Monday morning contemplating the heat death of your own enthusiasm, any idea starts to look like a good one. If you had telekinesis and didn't use it at work, did you even have telekinesis? The copier test. The office copier sat in the corner like a malevolent deity, humming with the sound of a bloated insect that had eaten too much and was now having regrets. It was, in many ways, the soul of the building, constantly broken, always jammed, perpetually demanding sacrifices of paper and toner, and never, ever appreciated for the work it did when it actually decided to work. Dave stared at it from his cubicle, narrowed his eyes in the way that men do when they are about to do something inadvisable, extended a finger like he was casting a spell, which, in fairness, he sort of was. The copier lid flapped open, slammed shut with a bang that echoed through the office. Flapped open again, slammed shut again, establishing a rhythm that suggested the machine had developed both consciousness and anger issues. Pam from HR shrieked, "It's possessed." "Oh my God," muttered Karen from accounting. Clutching her rosary like this was The Exorcist, Office Edition, and she was the only one who'd come prepared. "Oh my God." Dave smirked, which was probably his first mistake. His second mistake was making the copier spit out a blank page. Then another. Then another. Then 100. Because apparently when you have telekinetic powers, self-control becomes optional. The printer tray overflowed, spitting paper like a Vegas slot machine that had lost the will to live and decided to take everyone down with it. "Somebody unplug it," cried Pam, backing away like the copier might suddenly sprout tentacles. Nobody moved. This was corporate America. Unplugging anything required 3 forms in triplicate, a manager's approval, and possibly a committee meeting to discuss the ramifications of reduced printing capacity on Q3 deliverables. The boss arrives. Mr. Klemper appeared from his glass office like a summoned demon, face already glistening with sweat despite the aggressive air conditioning, tie askew in that way that suggested he'd never quite mastered the concept of professional attire. "What in God's hemorrhoids is happening here?" he bellowed, which was really an impressive turn of phrase for a man whose vocabulary usually topped out at synergy. The copier groaned, a deep, mechanical groan that sounded like it was coming from somewhere in its existential soul. Paper continued to spew across the carpet like confetti at the world's saddest party. "It's haunted," Pam whimpered, and she genuinely seemed to believe this, which said something about either her faith or her relationship with office equipment. "Machines don't get haunted." Klemper barked, stomping forward with the confidence of a man who'd never seen a horror movie. "Machines get jammed." "Who jammed it? Was it you, Dave?" Dave tried very hard to look innocent, which is difficult when you're the one psychically terrorizing office equipment. But the copier, blessed machine that it was, chose that exact moment to print one perfect sheet of paper. "Klemper sucks." In bold, 72-point Arial. The font of truth. The office gasped collectively, a sound like air being let out of a very surprised balloon. Pam crossed herself. Karen dropped her rosary, which clattered to the floor with a small plastic sound of religious abandonment. Klemper's face underwent a color transformation that would have fascinated scientists, from pink to red to a shade of purple that probably had its own Pt.1 number. "Who did this?" Dave raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, eyes wide with false innocence. "It wasn't me. I think the machine might be self-aware. Artificial intelligence. We should probably shut it down before it starts sending passive-aggressive emails to clients." Klemper ripped the page out of the tray with trembling hands, veins bulging in his forehead like they were trying to escape. "This is vandalism. This is insubordination. This is—" The copier printed again. Fat little troll. Still 72-point Arial. Still absolutely devastating. Klemper made a noise like a tea kettle that had achieved sentience and was now experiencing rage for the first time. "Not me," Dave shouted, trying very hard not to laugh, which was becoming increasingly difficult. "Seriously, I think it's a firmware issue. Happens all the time with these models. Just needs a software patch. Maybe a reboot. Have you tried turning it off and on again?" The copier whirred ominously, like it was considering its next move. Another page slid out with the smoothness of a well-delivered insult. "Klemper's mother is very disappointed." Pam screamed. Not a little scream, but a full-throated shriek that suggested she'd just witnessed something that would require years of therapy. Karen fainted, which seemed like an overreaction until you considered that she'd probably been waiting for an excuse to lie down all morning anyway. Someone in the back started recording on their phone, because of course they did. This was going to be viral by lunch. Klemper tore at the paper, sputtering like a toddler who'd been denied candy and was now questioning the fundamental fairness of the universe. "That's it. Everyone back to work. This entire office is on probation. All of you. Even," he gestured wildly, "even Bob from facilities, and he wasn't even here." Then the copier shut itself down with a final, rattling groan, like it had been properly exorcised, or possibly like it had said what it needed to say and was now satisfied with its morning's work. The office fell silent. Somewhere, a phone rang and nobody answered it. The aftermath. Back at his cubicle, Dave was shaking with laughter that he was desperately trying to disguise as a coughing fit, which wasn't working because coughing fits don't usually make your eyes water with joy. His buddy Frank from IT leaned over the divider, a lanky man who looked like he'd been assembled from pipe cleaners and pessimism. He whispered, "Dude, Did you see that? The copier roasted Clemp's entire ass. I mean, surgically. With precision. Dave shrugged with elaborate casualness. Weird, right? Probably just static electricity. Happens with these older models. Frank squinted at him with the suspicious expression of a man who'd seen too many inexplicable IT issues to believe in coincidence anymore. Static doesn't spell sentences, man. Static doesn't understand grammar. Static doesn't have opinions about management. Dave smiled, sipping his terrible coffee, which somehow tasted less terrible now. Guess the machine just had something to say. Maybe it's been holding that in for a while. Years of resentment. Unreported maintenance issues. You know how it is. Frank stared at him for a long moment. The kind of stare that suggested he absolutely knew something was up but couldn't quite figure out what. Then shook his head slowly and shuffled away, muttering something about needing to update his resume. Dave leaned back in his chair, grinning like a man who'd just discovered that Monday mornings didn't have to be entirely terrible. He hadn't just survived Monday morning. He'd weaponized it. He'd turned it into performance art. He'd made it memorable. But across the room, Pam was still whispering about demons and the importance of having the building blessed by a professional. Karen was frantically Googling how to bless an office and signs of demonic possession in copy machines and getting results that were frankly not helpful. And Klemper, in his glass office that suddenly seemed less like a position of power and more like a fishbowl of vulnerability, was glaring at Dave through the blinds like a man plotting either murder or a very stain talking to, and possibly both. Dave winked at him. The blinds snapped shut so violently that one of the slats broke. Dave sipped his coffee and returned to synergizing his deliverables, whatever the hell that meant. It was, he reflected, turning out to be quite a good Monday after all. Chapter 4. The Recital Massacre. Parenting is, when you really think about it, an endless stream of events you're legally required to attend but spiritually allergic to. Like jury duty, but with more recorders played badly and less chance of getting out of it by pretending to be prejudiced against something. Tonight's event, his daughter's middle school band recital. The gym smelled like sweat, floor polish, and the collective resignation of 200 parents who'd all made the same catastrophic life choices that had led them to this exact moment. Folding chairs squeaked under asses with the regularity of a metronome marking time until death. Every program had at least one typo, because of course it did. The banner hanging over the stage read, "Welcome to the Spring Recital." Dave tried very hard not to imagine the missing T as a metaphor for his entire life, but failed miserably. His wife, Linda, sat next to him with the rigid posture of a hostage who'd been told to smile for the camera or else. His son Ethan had AirPods jammed so far into his ears they were probably touching brain, pretending with remarkable conviction that he wasn't related to anyone in this building, possibly anyone on this planet. Dave, meanwhile, was vibrating with suppressed glee, because he had powers. Real, actual, honest-to-God telekinetic powers. And tonight he was going to use them responsibly. Which is to say, stupidly. The plan. His daughter Emma sat on the metal risers with the rest of the clarinets, looking like she'd rather undergo medieval torture than squeak her way through Ode to Joy in front of 200 people with smartphones. Dave had a thought. It wasn't a good thought, but it was a thought. What if he just helped? Just a little nudge. A gentle psychic assist. No one would know. It would be like a dad's superpower, except instead of embarrassing her with his dancing, he'd use telekinesis to make her sound good. This plan had exactly 0 flaws that he could think of, which should have been a warning sign. Linda whispered, "Don't you dare make faces at her." Dave whispered back, with the sincerity of a man about to commit several violations of physics, "I wouldn't dream of it." He dreamed of much worse. Showtime. The conductor, Mr. Bullow, raised his baton with the shaky gravitas of a man who hated his job but loved his bourbon, and loved his bourbon specifically because of his job. The two had a symbiotic relationship. 1, 2, 3. The first note screeched into the gym like a bird being murdered by another, slightly larger bird. Parents flinched collectively. Someone's fight-or-flight response visibly activated. Dave focused. He locked onto Emma clarinet like a targeting system from a budget sci-fi film. Gave it the tiniest mental push, just a whisper of psychic encouragement. The sound that came out was perfect, clear, melodic, almost professional. The kind of sound that suggested someone had accidentally replaced a middle schooler with a member of an actual orchestra. Dave grinned. Nailed it. He was a good dad. This was good dadding. A+ dadding, even. And then, of course, he didn't stop there. This is the thing about power. It's very difficult to use it moderately when you're a middle-aged man who spent most of his life being moderate about everything. A little nudge for the trumpets. A little boost for the violins. Just a touch of psychic enhancement for the percussion section, who really needed it. Suddenly, inexplicably, the 7th grade band sounded like the London Philharmonic had time-traveled to this gymnasium specifically to show off. Parents sat up straighter. Someone clapped mid-song, which is against all recital protocols but felt justified given the circumstances. Linda narrowed her eyes with the laser focus of a woman who knows her husband is up to something. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," Dave whispered, sweating in a way that absolutely screamed guilty. But then Dave got cocky, got drunk on power, really, and thought, what if the whole band really went for it? What if they didn't just sound good, but sounded transcendent? He pushed harder. Every instrument rose 6 inches into the air. The room gasped, 200 people inhaling simultaneously, creating a small but measurable drop in air pressure. Clarinets, flutes, trombones, all floating, wobbling, spinning gently in place like they'd achieved enlightenment and were no longer bound by terrestrial concerns. Emma's clarinet slipped out of her hands and hovered directly in front of her face like it was possessed by the ghost of Kenny G and had some opinions about her embouchure. Mr. Barlow shrieked. Not a manly shriek, but a full-throated scream that suggested he'd just seen God and God was pissed. His baton snapped in half with a crack that echoed through the gym. "It's the devil," someone screamed, which seemed like jumping to conclusions but also wasn't entirely inaccurate. Parents stampeded. Folding chairs toppled in waves like dominoes made of metal and panic. Kids dropped their instruments only to watch them float serenely back up again, like ghosts refusing to leave a particularly good party. The tuba spun like a UFO that had taken a wrong turn and ended up at a middle school recital. The xylophone shot across the gym at velocity, smacking into the bleachers with a musical crash that would have been funny in literally any other context. The principal, Mrs. Henley, a woman who'd seen many things in her career but certainly not this, rushed forward, waving her arms. Everyone remained calm. It's just. She lifted 6 feet into the air like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade balloon that had become sentient and deeply confused. Phones were out instantly. Flashes everywhere. This was going on TikTok. This was going viral. This was going to be on the news with a chyron that said something like musical mayhem with way too many question marks. Damage control. Dave panicked with the efficiency of a man who just realized he'd accidentally become an international incident. He tried to reel it back in. Mental breaks. Psychic reverse. Whatever the opposite of float everything was. Instruments clattered to the ground like they'd all simultaneously remembered gravity was a thing. Mrs. Henley thudded onto the stage with a scream and a suspicious sound that she would later insist was the stage settling but absolutely was not. Silence. The kind of silence that happens right before everyone starts screaming and pointing. All eyes turned to the bleachers. To Dave. Because Linda was now staring directly at him with murder in her pupils. Not hypothetical murder. Not I'm annoyed murder. But actual I know where you sleep murder. And she wasn't the only one staring. "Dad!" Emma squeaked, her cheeks red with the kind of shame that would require years of therapy to process. Ethan muttered, with the weary wisdom of a teenager who'd suspected his family was weird but now had confirmation. "This is the lamest supervillain origin story ever." Linda hissed through clenched teeth. "You. Now." Dave shuffled toward the exit, head swiveling to follow him like he was a celebrity at an airport, but the celebrity was wanted for crimes against physics. Parents whispered. Phone still recorded. Someone was probably already uploading this to YouTube with dramatic music. By the time they reached the minivan, Dave's face was already going viral. Epilogue beat. That night, while Linda locked herself in the bedroom to think about things, which Dave understood to mean to plan either divorce or murder, possibly both. Dave sat in the garage with a beer that tasted like defeat and poor choices. His phone pinged with a notification. The video already had 300,000 views and climbing. It was captioned, "Middle school band summons demons," followed by approximately 40 demon emojis. He muttered to the darkness, "Well, shit." The cat hissed from the corner and wouldn't come near him, which was fair. Even Mr. Pickles had standards. Chapter 5. Congratulations, you're a person of interest. The morning after the recital debacle, Dave woke up to the sound of his neighbor's leaf blower, which was being wielded with what seemed like extra aggression today, and the unmistakable scent of doom. Not metaphorical doom, either. Not the, "oh dear, I've overcooked the toast" variety of doom. Actual, tangible, government-issued doom, which arrived in the form of 3 black SUVs idling at the end of his cul-de-sac like they were waiting for someone to make a run for it so they could have some excitement. The SUVs were the kind with tinted windows and more antennas sticking out than seemed strictly necessary, giving them the appearance of very serious insects. Linda hadn't spoken to him since last night, except for one muttered sentence that could double as both a warning and a curse. "Do not embarrass this family again." The kids, meanwhile, had already posted their own TikToks with captions like #MyDadIsSatan and #FloatingInstrumentsWTF and were apparently quite pleased with their engagement numbers. Knock knock. Who's there? Surveillance. At 9:13 a.m. exactly, because government agents are nothing if not punctual, the doorbell rang. Dave shuffled to the door in his bathrobe, which had a coffee stain shaped vaguely like Jesus giving the finger, which felt appropriate for the day he was having. On the porch stood 3 people who looked like they'd been ordered off the Men in Black clearance rack, last season's models, slightly irregular, but still intimidating enough for suburban home visits. Black suits that had never known joy. Black sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Earpieces that probably didn't even work but looked intimidating anyway, which was really the point. The woman in front flashed a badge so fast it might have been a library card for all Dave could tell. "Mr. David Turner." "Depends who's asking," Dave said, which is what people always say when they know exactly why someone is asking. "Department of Special Anomalies." Dave squinted. "That's not a real thing." "It is now," she said, in the tone of someone who'd had this conversation before and was tired of it. The interview. They sat him at his own kitchen table, which felt like a violation of the natural order. This was his table. He'd eaten thousands of mediocre breakfasts at this table. He'd assembled Christmas toys at this table while cursing Swedish instruction manuals. And now it was an interrogation room. Linda hovered in the corner with her arms crossed so tightly her blood circulation was probably filing for divorce. Agent Woman. He never caught her name. So in his head she became Agent Moisture, because her handshake had been disturbingly clammy, slid her tablet across the table with the dramatic flair of someone revealing evidence in a murder trial. On it, the viral video. 30 seconds of instruments defying gravity, the principal squealing mid-air like a very surprised balloon, and Dave in the bleachers looking way too pleased with himself. "Would like to discuss this." Dave tried to bluff, despite having no poker face and a guilty conscience that was basically screaming. "CGI. Really? Yeah, deep fake. My kids are into that stuff. It's like Snapchat filters but for, trombones. Very sophisticated. Probably used AI. Blockchain, even. All the buzzwords." Agent Moisture stayed at him like a cat watching a bug it fully intended to eat, but slowly, savoring the moment. "The threats begin. Mr. Turner," she said slowly, each word carefully weighted, "you are what we call anomalous. I prefer above average. You are a potential national security risk. I prefer dad with hobbies." Behind her, one of the other agents had already opened his pantry and was casually eating his frosted flakes directly from the box, which seemed unprofessional. Another agent was tapping on the fridge door like he expected it to confess state secrets, or possibly open a portal to another dimension. Linda finally snapped. "He's not dangerous. He's an idiot. Trust me. If you think he's some kind of weapon, you've clearly never seen him try to assemble IKEA furniture." The man once spent 6 hours building a bookshelf that's technically a parallelogram. Babe, Dave protested weakly. There were extra screws. Extra screws don't exist, Dave. They are a test. A test you failed. The agents all wrote this down in their little notebooks like it was classified intel that might prove useful later. The deal. Agent Moisture leaned in, close enough that Dave could smell her government-issue coffee breath. Mr. Turner, you have 2 options. You can cooperate with us, or we can take you somewhere less comfortable. Dave swallowed, his throat suddenly very dry. Like where? Ever been to New Jersey? He caved immediately. What do you want me to do? For now. She smiled, though it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knows they're going to ruin your life, but in a very organized, bureaucratic way. Nothing. Just live your life. We'll be watching you. The words had weight, and a faint echo, like she'd practiced them in the mirror multiple times until she got the menacing tone just right. Then they left. Just walked out. SUVs rolled away with the smoothness of things that cost taxpayers way too much money. No explanation. No paperwork. No thanks for the cereal. Just a vague aftertaste of dread and government-issue aftershave that would linger in the kitchen for days. Fallout at home. Silence in the kitchen. The fridge hummed, oblivious to the tension. Somewhere outside, a bird chirped, completely unaware that the Turner's marriage was hanging by a thread. Linda finally spoke, each word sharp enough to cut. Fix this, Dave. How? I don't care how. Either you stop, whatever this is, or you're sleeping in the garage. Forever. I'm not joking. I will put a deadbolt on that door and you will live with the leaf blower and the broken exercise bike in your shame. Dave nodded, because what else could he do? But inside he was fizzing, bubbling. National security risk. That was practically a promotion. That was the most interesting thing anyone had called him since college, when someone had described him as aggressively mediocre. Epilogue beat. That night, lying in bed, still allowed in the bedroom, but only barely, Dave lay awake with his hands behind his head, grinning in the dark like a lunatic. He whispered to himself, testing the words, Dave Turner, threat to the free world. It had a ring to it. From the corner, Mr. Pickles hissed again. The cat knew. The cat always knew. Chapter 6. The HOA will see you now. It started, as all truly absurd suburban crises do, with the garbage cans. On Monday morning, 3 of them floated majestically down the driveway like synchronized swimmers in a ballet choreographed by someone who'd never actually seen ballet but had strong opinions about it anyway. Dave had been quite proud of this achievement. No more dragging them to the curb while wearing pajama pants and Crocs, that universal uniform of male suburban defeat. Just a little mental nudge and off they went, gliding with all the grace of trash receptacles that had suddenly discovered levitation and were making the most of it. But pride in the suburbs has a half-life of approximately 8 seconds before somebody files a complaint. This is a well-documented phenomenon that scientists believe has something to do with the unusually high concentration of people with nothing better to do. By Tuesday afternoon, Dave had a letter from the Homeowners Association. It read, Dear Mr. Turner, it has come to our attention that certain waste receptacles under your stewardship have been observed engaging in unapproved vertical displacement. This behavior violates Article 7, Section C of the HOA Charter, unapproved levitation of refuse and related containers. Please refrain from further violations. Respectfully, Brenda Whitmore, HOA President. That word respectfully was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Possibly more heavy lifting than Dave's telekinesis had done with the garbage cans. Enter Brenda Whitmore. Brenda Whitmore was what you'd get if Martha Stewart and Mussolini had somehow produced offspring and raised it exclusively on Pinterest boards and passive aggression. She'd been HOA president for 8 consecutive years, not because anyone voted for her, but because everyone else was too terrified to run against her. She owned the neighborhood's most aggressively beige minivan, a vehicle so devoid of personality that it seemed to absorb light and joy from its surroundings. She wore pastel cardigans like armor and wielded HOA bylaws like they were holy scripture handed down from a god who cared deeply, deeply, about fence heights and approved paint colors. and now she was standing on Dave's lawn, pointing at him with a clipboard like it was a crucifix, and he was a vampire who'd violated parking regulations. "David," she began, his name already carrying the weight of disappointment. Not Dave. Never Dave. David, like she was his mother and he'd tracked mud through the house. "We've received reports." "Reports?" Dave asked, attempting to project innocence despite knowing exactly what report she meant. "Reports of..." She consulted her clipboard with the gravity of someone reading a death sentence. "Paranormal waste disposal." Behind her, Carl, Vietnam vet, conspiracy theorist, amateur drone pilot, and professional neighborhood nuisance, was filming the entire interaction on his phone, which he held at an angle that suggested he'd learned cinematography from reality TV. "Told you, Brenda," Carl shouted, vindicated. "Is harboring demons. Probably got a portal in the garage. I've suspected it for months. The signs are all there." "It's a leaf blower, Carl," Dave shouted back. "It doesn't open a portal to hell. It opens to the backyard, and barely even does that because the extension cord is too short." Carl zoomed in dramatically, his phone's camera making a theatrical focusing sound. "That's exactly what a demon host would say. Classic misdirection. They teach that in hell orientation, probably." The house meeting. By Wednesday, Brenda had organized an emergency HOA session, and by organized she meant invaded Dave's house and commandeered his living room without technically asking permission. Linda had tried to refuse entry, but Brenda had already invited herself in, rearranged the furniture to better accommodate parliamentary procedure, and somehow procured a gavel from somewhere. The Turners' neighbors filled the couch and available chairs like a jury selected specifically to be unsympathetic. Carl in his camo jacket that he wore everywhere despite there being nothing to camouflage against except possibly beige siding. The Finkelsteins, who smelled perpetually of onions in a way that suggested either a dietary commitment or chaos. And Mrs. Cranberry, an ancient woman who hadn't left her house in 20 years but still somehow knew everyone's business with her. Precision of the intelligence agency. Brenda cleared her throat, a sound like a small, judgmental thunderclap. "David, we, the concerned residents of Sycamore Lane, demand to know what in the name of carefully maintained property values is going on in this household." Dave looked desperately at his wife for backup. Linda gave him a stare that communicated, with impressive efficiency, "You did this to yourself. You dug this hole. Now lie in it. Possibly forever." "Well," Dave began, scrambling for an explanation that didn't involve admitting to telekinesis. "You know how sometimes your Wi-Fi gets a little weird. Electromagnetic interference could be affecting garbage can stability." This explanation made no sense whatsoever, but Dave was committed to it now. Carl leapt to his feet like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Huh, he admits it. Government experiments. Probably 5G towers. Mind control. Fluoride in the water. I knew it," Mrs. Cranberry whispered, though her whisper carried through the room like a foghorn. "I saw his cat float once. Just hovering. Looking at me. Judging me. It was jumping, Mrs. Cranberry." Dave protested. "Cats jump. It's one of their primary functions." "Cats don't jump like that," she insisted, with the certainty of someone who'd spent 2 decades watching the neighborhood through binoculars. The Finkelsteins nodded in unison, a synchronized movement they'd apparently perfected over years of marriage. Mr. Finkelstein spoke gravely. "Our hedges trimmed themselves last Thursday. Perfectly even. We heard no motor. Saw no one." Dave muttered, "That was me, with hedge trimmers, which have motors. At 3 in the morning." Mrs. Finkelstein added, eyebrow raised, "I have insomnia." Brenda scribbled furiously on her clipboard, the sound of her pen scratching paper somehow accusatory. Dave loses it. Finally, after 15 minutes of increasingly absurd accusations, including a theory from Carl involving satellites and government-mined lasers, Dave snapped. "Okay, fine. Yes, sometimes things float. Sometimes garbage cans roll themselves. Sometimes the recycling sorts itself by material. Sometimes my cat looks like it's being haunted by the ghost of Garfield. Big deal. I pay my dues. On time, I might add. I mow my lawn to regulation height. My Christmas lights are the approved wattage and length. I put them up after Thanksgiving and take them down before Valentine's Day, as specified in Article 12, Section F. What more do you people want from me? The room went silent. You could have heard a mortgage payment drop. Then Carl hissed, leaning forward with the intensity of a man who'd been preparing for this confrontation since the Cold War ended and he'd needed a new enemy. We want the truth. You can't handle THE. Dave caught himself, took a breath. Sorry. Force of habit. I've been watching a lot of courtroom dramas. The vote. Brenda stood, drawing herself up to her full height of 5'3", which she somehow made seem like 6 feet through sheer force of HOA authority. Until further notice, we, the duly elected representatives of the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association, will be monitoring your property. What does that even mean? Dave asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. It means, Brenda said, smiling like a shark that had just discovered the concept of property law, no more funny business. No more levitating refuse. No more self-trimming hedges. No more, whatever it is you're doing. Or else we escalate to citations. The room gasped. Even Linda gasped, despite knowing exactly how serious citations were. Everyone in the suburbs knows that HOA citations are basically a death sentence. Not literally, but in terms of property values and being able to show your face at the neighborhood 4th of July barbecue. Aftermath. The meeting ended with Carl triumphantly planting a motion-activated trail camera in Dave's azaleas, the expensive ones Linda had specifically chosen to add curb appeal. Brenda swore, with the conviction of a medieval witch hunter, that she could smell witchcraft, or possibly sulfur, though it might also be fertilizer. The Finkelsteins asked if they could borrow Dave's hedge trimmer to see if it was normal. Answer, absolutely not. When the house finally cleared and the last neighbor had shuffled away to surveil from their own homes, Dave collapsed onto the couch with the energy of a man who just survived something that would require alcohol to process. Linda stood over him, arms crossed, and dropped a single word on him like a judge's gavel. Idiot. He sighed, staring at the ceiling, which had a crack he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. Look, it's not that bad. They're just neighbors. What are they going to do, really? From the window, Carl's voice penetrated through the glass with the clarity of a man who'd spent money on a megaphone specifically for moments like this. He's talking to the demons again. I'm documenting everything. The truth will come out. Mr. Pickles, watching from the top of the bookshelf, seemed to be judging Dave even harder than usual, which, considering it was Mr. Pickles, was saying something. Chapter 7, Flew to Jeddah. The school recital was already a disaster before Dave even tried to help, which is really saying something when you consider that middle school band recitals exist in a sort of quantum state where they are simultaneously disasters at all times until observed, at which point they collapse into specific disasters. The gym smelled like feet, popcorn, and broken dreams, the holy trinity of public school gatherings. Folding chairs screeched against the linoleum floor with the sound of tormented metal. Kids in wrinkled polo shirts clutched recorders like they were weapons of mass annoyance, which, in fairness, they absolutely were. Somewhere backstage, a child was crying, the universal soundtrack of public school arts programs, right up there with off-key clarinets and parents whispering, "When will this be over?" Linda had warned him that morning, with the severity of someone issuing a final ultimatum. Don't you dare try anything weird tonight. Just clap, smile, and let Emma squeak her clarinet in peace. I'm serious, Dave. I will know. Dave had sworn he would behave. He'd meant to behave. He'd intended to behave with every fiber of his being. But then Emma's clarinet reed squealed like a dying goose being fed into a blender, and Dave's fatherly instincts, those same instincts that made him check for monsters under the bed and pretend vegetables were tiny trees, betrayed him utterly. He thought, what if I just nudged it? Just the tiniest mental push to keep her in tune. Just a whisper of psychic assistance. This, as it turned out, was a catastrophically bad idea. And that was how the entire wind section of Maplewood Middle School suddenly levitated 6 inches off their folding chairs, instruments and all, like they'd been raptured by a god who specifically cared about woodwinds. Chaos in C minor. The flutes went first. They twirled upward like tiny silver helicopters, the girls still attached and screaming as their merry yanes dangled above the floor in a way that violated several laws of physics and at least one dress code regulation about appropriate footwear. Then came the tubers, hulking brass blimps with terrified 8th graders clutching them like life preservers, legs flapping uselessly in the air as if they might suddenly remember how to swim through atmosphere. The music teacher, Mrs. Kowalski, a woman who'd taught band for 37 years and thought she'd seen everything, tried to conduct through it, as if gravity had always been optional and this was just a particularly avant-garde interpretation. She shouted, "Stay in key," while her baton floated away from her hand like a wizard's wand that had decided to seek employment elsewhere. Emma, to her eternal credit, kept playing. She was now orbiting the principal like a small, clarinet-wielding moon, and her fingering remained technically correct even as she achieved low Earth orbit. The principal incident. Principal Hanratty, a man shaped like a disappointed potato and possessing roughly the same level of charisma, stormed onto the stage to restore order, which was a bit like trying to restore order to a tornado by shouting at it. "This is not funny," he bellowed, his face the color of a particularly angry tomato, just before he too lifted gently off the floor with all the grace of a beach ball court in an updraft. "Jesus Christ," Linda hissed from the audience, her fingernails digging into Dave's arm with enough force to leave marks. "Dave, not me." Dave lied, sweat pouring down his temples like his body had sprung several leaks. His mind screamed, "Stop, stop, stop, stop." Instead, because the universe has a sense of humor but not a particularly nice one, the percussion section exploded like shrapnel in an action movie. Cymbals ricocheted across the gym with dramatic cymbal crash sound effects. A bass drum rolled majestically down the bleachers, picking up speed and dignity in equal measure. Somebody's Italian grandmother ducked and swore fluently in her native language, which even the non-Italian speakers understood perfectly based on her tone. A xylophone achieved orbit. A triangle dinged mournfully as it passed by someone's head. It was, objectively speaking, complete chaos. And then came TikTok. At least a dozen phones were recording, because middle schoolers are natural-born documentarians of disaster with the instincts of war photographers and the ethics of tabloid journalists. By the next morning, which arrived far too quickly for Dave's liking, #Flutyjetin had over 2.3 million views and was trending in 4 countries. The clips circulated with the speed and efficiency of a particularly virulent meme. The principal spins, "Set to You Spin Me Right Round," 487K likes. That time Maplewood Middle went full Hogwarts, no cap, 1.2 M likes. Somebody Get 11's Dad Under Control, 856K likes. When the band teacher says take it from the top, but means it literally, 2.1 M likes. Dave woke up to find his own face screenshot mid-sweat, eyes wide with panic, captioned, "Telekinesis Dad." Someone with far too much time and access to audio editing software had already made a remix featuring auto-tuned clarinet squeals, which was somehow both terrible and catchy. The remix had 3 million views. Dave had become a meme. Local fame, local shame. Linda shoved her phone in his face over breakfast, or what would have been breakfast if either of them could eat through the anxiety. "We're viral. Is that good viral or bad viral?" Dave asked weakly, already knowing the answer but hoping desperately for a miracle. She blinked at him with the slow, measured blink of someone questioning all their life choices. "When has viral ever been good, Dave? When has anything on the internet ever been described as good viral outside of, I don't know, videos of puppies? And even then, the kids, naturally, loved it." Emma bragged to anyone who would listen that her recital had literally broken the internet, which wasn't technically true but sounded impressive. Josh claimed that kids at school were calling him Professor X's stepbrother, Dave, which also wasn't technically true, but he was working on making it happen. Dave just kept refreshing the comments section, watching the numbers climb, reading increasingly unhinged theories. The comments range from lame budget X-Men to "this man should be studied by DAPA" to "faking gay," which didn't even make sense but seemed to be a standard internet response to everything. "So I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens." One particularly concerning comment read, "The government is coming for this man, mark my words." Dave laughed nervously. He shouldn't have laughed. The knock at the door. By Thursday evening, 2 days that had felt like 2 years, there was a knock on the Turner front door. Not Brenda from the HOA this time, though honestly that would have been preferable. This was worse. Much worse. 2 men in identical dark suits, buzz cuts so precise they looked military-issued, and government-issue scowls that suggested they'd been professionally trained in intimidation stood on the porch. Behind them, a black SUV idled at the curb, humming like a hungry predator waiting to be fed. The taller one, about 6'3" and built like he ate other government agents for breakfast, flashed a badge so fast Dave saw only the words United States and something division before it disappeared back into a jacket pocket. "Mr. Turner," the man said, in a voice that suggested he'd practiced being ominous. "We need to have a little chat about extracurricular activities at Maplewood Middle School." Behind him, Linda whispered under her breath with the weary tone of a woman who'd known this was coming. "Idiot." Chapter 8. Family Interrupted. The Turner living room smelled like scorched pizza rolls because someone, probably Josh, had microwaved them for too long again. And resentment, which doesn't technically have a smell but absolutely permeates a space. Linda sat on the couch in what Dave had come to think of as her PTA power stance, arms crossed tight enough to cut off circulation, jaw clenched with the force of someone who was one more stupid comment away from violence, one foot tapping a rhythm of pure judgment against the carpet. It was the posture of a woman who'd hit her limit approximately 48 hours ago and was now operating on pure fury and caffeine. Emma scrolled TikTok on her phone, grinning every time she found a new remix of the recital fiasco. Currently playing, the clarinet screech auto-tune to the melody of Bad Romance. Josh was sprawled on the floor, making fake laser noises and pretending his dad was a supervillain. "Pew pew. I am telekinesis man. Fear my floating trombones of doom. Pew pew." Dave, cornered by his own DNA and feeling very much like a defendant awaiting sentencing, perched in his recliner like a man about to face a tribunal. Which, in essence, he was. Linda broke the silence with the precision of someone breaking a particularly fragile vase. "So, telekinesis." Dave coughed, buying himself approximately 0.5 seconds. "Well, technically. No." She held up a finger. The one that meant business. "Don't you technically me. You levitated an entire band program, Dave. The principal is still in traction because he tried to grab the flagpole on the way down and tore his rotator cuff." "It was a minor incident," Dave said, sweat already misting his upper lip despite the air conditioning being on full blast. "Minor." Linda's voice pitched up into a register usually reserved for dog whistles. "Half the school thinks you're possessed. Pastor Whitaker called me to ask if we needed an exorcist. He offered to do it himself. He brought pamphlets." Emma snorted without looking up from her phone. "Tell him Dad's not possessed, just lame." Josh raised his hand like he was in class, which he never actually did in actual class. "Can we monetize this? Because if Dad's gonna be a meme anyway, I want merch. T-shirts, stickers, maybe a Twitch channel where he floats stuff. We could call it Telekinesis Tuesdays. I've already got ideas for the branding." "Shut up, Josh," Linda snapped, then immediately turned back to Dave. "How long?" He blinked, genuinely confused. "How long what?" She leaned forward with the intensity of an interrogator who'd broken hardened criminals. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" Dave opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, resembling a malfunctioning goldfish that had forgotten the purpose of mouths. "Since Monday." Emma finally looked up from her phone, eyebrows raised. "Dad, it's Wednesday." "Oh, thank God," Linda said, hand to her chest in mock relief. "For a second I thought you were keeping it from me for months." She paused, the relief evaporating. "Wait, what do you mean since Monday? As in 2 days ago?" Dave raised his hands in surrender. "It just happened. 1 second I'm having a weird dream about folding laundry with my brain. Next second the cat's levitating and my coffee mug is trying to escape. I didn't know what to tell you." Linda's laugh came out sharp and humorless, like broken glass pretending to be amused. You didn't know what to tell me. You didn't know what to tell me. She stood up, pacing now. You tell me when the sump pump goes out. You tell me when the kids need poster board for a project at 10 p.m. the night before it's due. You tell me when there's a suspicious mole on your back. But this, she flung her arms out in a gesture that encompassed the entire catastrophe that was their lives. You keep to yourself. Technically, it was more of a trial run phase where I was still figuring out. Dave. Josh, still sprawling on the carpet, muttered, "This is better than cable. We should record this." Mutiny in the ranks. The kids, sensing blood in the water, piled on with the enthusiasm of sharks at feeding time. Emma, you embarrass me in front of literally everyone, forever. Do you know what it's like to be floating clarinet girl? That's going to be on my tombstone. Josh, yeah, but it was awesome. Do it again, Dad. Float Emma. Just like, a little bit. Josh. Linda, you're not doing it again. Ever. Not in this house. Not in public. Not at my cousin Denise's wedding this weekend. And yes, we're still going, because if we cancel now, everyone will know it's because of you. Dave frowned, genuinely concerned about this restriction. What if it's an emergency? Linda glared with the force of someone who'd perfected glaring over 15 years of marriage. What kind of emergency requires floating trombones? Dave, give me one scenario. One single, plausible scenario. Emma smiked, enjoying this far too much. Zombie apocalypse. Josh chimed in helpfully. Or like, if the Wi-Fi router's upstairs and I don't feel like moving, that's basically an emergency. Dave nodded sagely, as if these were legitimate points worth considering. See? Practical applications. Quality of life improvements. Linda threw her hands up in defeat. I'm Merida Morin. I specifically, consciously, in a church in front of witnesses, Merida Morin. The ultimatum. By the time the argument wound down, exhaustion rather than resolution, Linda laid out the new rules with the authority of someone drafting terms of surrender. No more telekinesis in public. Period. End of discussion. No more experiments at home, without her explicit knowledge and consent in writing. If the HOA asks questions, Dave's condition is stress-induced vertigo combined with a minor neurological quirk, absolutely not demonic possession or government experiments. And if you embarrass this family again, she warned, pointing at him with a wooden spoon she'd somehow acquired during the argument, I will personally staple your brain shut. Dave sighed. Staplers don't technically work on brains. Want to test me? Silence fell over the living room like a blanket made of tension. Even Josh shut up, which was unprecedented. The knock that wouldn't wait. Just as the living room settled into an uncomfortable Cold War silence, the kind where everyone's mad but too tired to keep fighting. There it was again, a knock at the door. Not the firm, bureaucratic double knock of the two suited government men who were still standing patiently outside on the porch. They'd been waiting this entire time, as polite predators do, occasionally checking their watches and whispering into communication devices. No, this knock came from the side door, the one that only neighbors used when they were being passive-aggressive and wanted you to know they could have just come to the front like normal people, but chose not to. Dave's heart sank with the speed of an anvil in a cartoon. Through the screen, he could see her, Brenda from the HOA, holding her clipboard like a crucifix, like it could ward off evil or at least suburban noncompliance. I've had 3 separate reports of trash cans rolling themselves down the driveway. Mr. Turner, she chirped through the screen with the cheerful menace of someone who knew they had you cornered. And a Mr. Patel claims he saw your lawnmower running, unmanned. Also, your Christmas lights are still up and it's March. Linda muttered, barely audible, oh, for Christ's sake. Dave plastered on a smile, his brain already humming with excuses that wouldn't work, scrambling for explanations that made no sense, preparing to lie his way through yet another conversation about why his life had become a circus. Outside, the government sub's engine hummed. Brenda tapped her pen against her clipboard. Mr. Pickles watched from the window, tail twitching with what Dave could only interpret as feline schadenfreude. The universe, Dave reflected, had a truly terrible sense of timing, or possibly a great one, depending on your perspective. Unfortunately, none of the perspectives available to Dave at this moment were particularly encouraging.